Hey everybody, welcome to the video with my final thoughts for week 6 of the NFL season over on DraftKings. This is a more finalized and polished version of the first look we did earlier in the week. Then I have lineup building and core play scheduled to go tomorrow if you do want to check those out. But if you do find this specific video helpful in any way possible, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet already. If you want to take that one step further, you can official member over on Patreon. Link is down below in the description for that. Do a lot of extra sports over there besides NFL, NASCAR, MLB, and NBA starting very, very soon. Optimizers for all sports, ownership projections, cheat sheets, data sheets, Discord community, all that fun stuff. Link can be found down below. Do you think you'll find it quite helpful? And last but not least, this video is sponsored by PrizePicks. I'm sure most of you know this by now, but if you don't, it's daily fantasy sports simplified. Just you versus the projections. There's no sharks, 150 max contests, or salary cap restrictions, or anything like that. Just you versus the props they offer each and every single day. And as of right now, if you do sign over there, you can get a free money bonus. That's an instant deposit match up to $100, so it's free money. When I use it to your advantage, just trying to help you out here. When you use code CPEN and tell them I sent you. But I think it'll be up for the plugs for the most part. So without further ado, let's dive into today's video. And as always, we'll start with the quarterback position. I wouldn't say it's deep this week, but there is several good options in either price range, depending on where you want to go. You guys know me in cash games, I tend to spend down. So Taylor Heineke there at the very bottom at $5,800 and a good matchup versus KC, which would be a high scoring game. Does look quite viable to me, but if you do want to spend up in tournaments or you just have some extra cash in cash games this weekend, Patrick Mahomes all the way up top $8,300 is definitely a very solid option. I think it's either going to be him or Heineke is the highest end quarterback this week, or Lamar Jackson. They are currently my 3 highest projected owned quarterbacks on this site. Not my own highest projected quarterbacks, but it's what I'm projecting over on DraftKings this weekend, and I don't think many people would disagree with that. Mahomes gets a great spot here versus Washington. This game features the highest over on the week at 54.5. Highest implied team total 30.5, and the line is 6.5 points here. And Mahomes, he has been throwing some picks this year, but yardage-wise, touchdown-wise, it's all been very good this season. Nearly 300 yards per game, over 3 passing touchdowns. And we're glad it was a layer, so I get the man to just rely on his arm even more. And this fantastic matchup as a quarterback versus Washington. They are currently allowing the second most points per game, only behind the team Mahomes plays for. The Kansas City Chiefs over 300 passing yards, nearly 3 passing touchdowns, nearly 30 DraftKings points per game, and their 29th DVA versus pass. And Mahomes has offered you a little bit of rushing upside this season as well, averaging around 30 rushing yards per game. So if you had the money for Mahomes, by all means, he is my top projected quarterback on the slate by a decent margin, although Lamar Jackson's not too far behind. And he's at a $1,000 discount, and I think we all know what happened last week, nearly 50 DraftKings points. I forget exactly what he ended with, but I just remember having him so much in the captain spot, and the score I was looking at from Lamar Jackson was absolutely insane. But that's the upside he offers you every single week. He's been fantastic this season. He's been throwing the ball really well, too. I know the yardage from last week's game is going to skew these numbers a little bit, but he's averaging over 300 passing yards per game right now. Passing touchdowns really aren't anything too high, but I think that's to be expected of Lamar Jackson. But the thing I like the most, he's over 9 yards per attempt. He's been going down the field very well this season, and he's averaging around 70 rushing yards per game, which is nearly a built-in 2 passing touchdown floor. So whatever he does through the air, just icing on top, but he's been actually very good through the air so far this season. Really nice to see. Nearly half a rushing touchdown and over 6 yards per carry. Matchup versus the Chargers is not as great, but Baker Mayfield did have a pretty strong game versus them last week, and I think Lamar Jackson, with his dual threat ability, is definitely one of the top quarterbacks to use on the entire slate. If you want to play him in cash games, no problem with that whatsoever. This game features a 51.5 point over-under, only a 2.5 point spread. I could see it being one of the best games of the entire week. And then Matthew Stafford, $6,700, probably more of a tournament option for me because I really like the running back Henderson in this game. But at the same time, I like his wide receivers in Cooper Kupp and Robert Woods, and I think they'll have some ownership too. So it's kind of a weird spot for Matthew Stafford, but definitely like the matchup versus the Giants. I will say there's some projected wind in this game, which I care way more about wind when it comes to rostering quarterbacks or just the passing game in general than I would rain, because rain historically has not showed much of a difference in terms of DraftKings points scored, but wind would definitely affect down the field and things like that. Matthew Stafford's a guy that can definitely go down the field with guys like Deshaun Jackson to hit on those big plays. So something to monitor. I do like Henderson a lot, though, and if I'm going to roster Henderson, especially in cash games, I'm not going to double up the quarterback. So I'm leaning towards Stafford in tournaments and Henderson, obviously, in cash games. I think we see him as the highest running back on the slate. This is obviously a good spot for the Rams. I mean, the Giants' defense is nothing to be scared about. They're on the road, 29 point implied team total, which is one of the highest in the slate. The thing I don't love is that they're 9.5 point favorites, which, I mean, I think it sets up really well for Henderson this week, but I mean, if you want to get lower ownership on a quarterback in a very good spot, Stafford is definitely your guy. Nearly 320 passing yards per game this season, about 2.5 passing touchdowns. The Giants are 22nd DVA versus the pass and 26th versus quarterbacks recently. Then dropping out Joe Burrow, $6,300. Earlier in the week on my first look video, I figured he was going to be the chalk quarterback, but I kind of overlooked Taylor Heineke down low, which it makes sense. He's a dog on the road. They're going to be playing catch-up. He has some rushing ability. I can definitely get behind Heineke in cash games. So Burrow, assuming Heineke's going to take a lot of ownership off of Burrow, because I'm not really projecting Burrow I mean, it's not like super far away from Heineke, but they're definitely in a different tier in terms of ownership this weekend. But Burrow's in a great spot versus Detroit. I mean, Mixon's a little banged up. I know we have Samaje Perine dealing with the COVID issue. We'll have to see if he's good to go. But $6,200 in a matchup versus Detroit. You have a great trio of wide receivers in Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, and Tyler Boyd, and even CJ Uzomah is capable of having a decent game. I mean, Detroit's defense is nothing to be scared of here. I mean, they're one of the worst defenses in football. I know they're currently 12th versus quarterbacks, it's so easy to run on them. But if the running backs are banged up, you might just have to move the ball through the air. And they're 27th DVA versus the pass. And Burrow, like I said, super cheap. All of his options are cheap. Definitely like him in tournaments a lot this weekend. I know he's only throwing the ball 27 times per game, which I realize is not something to be super excited about, but I definitely like the spot here versus Detroit. It's just too cheap. I definitely think there's some pretty high upside here, and it's only a 3.5 point spread, so the game should stay somewhat close, hopefully. Then Taylor Heineke, $5,800. I think he's going to be the popular cheap cash game quarterback this week. Just makes a lot of sense. I've already hinted at it like 3 times here, but KC is dead last versus quarterbacks, 31st DVA versus the pass, allowing over 31 DraftKings points per game, over 300 passing yards, and nearly 50 yards on the ground. And Heineke does have some rushing upside. He's not like a Lamar Jackson out there, but he is averaging 25 rushing yards per game, which is definitely a nice little floor boost there. His passing numbers are incredible, but he still has Terry McLaurin to get the ball to. We have Ricky Seals-Jones, who are all going to be popular options this weekend, so we got like the guy getting them the ball. Taylor Heineke, and what should be a high-scoring game, playing as a 6.5 point dog. Should be playing catch-up versus Swiss cheese defense. I think he makes plenty of sense at that price point. Then moving on to the running back position, again, it's a smaller slate, so I wouldn't say it's a super deep position this week, although I think the mid-range is kind of loaded. And if you just want to live in the mid-range and spend up at tight end or wide receiver this weekend, or maybe even quarterback if you want to go with Mahomes or Lamar Jackson, I think that's perfectly a fine way to go, because if we don't have Christian McCaffrey, the next best option is under $8,000, because there's no Derrick Henry on the slate, so I think you can definitely save some money at the RP position this weekend. So starting up top with CMC though, $8,800. If he's fully 100% good to go, he's too cheap for the potential he offers you every single week. Like the 2 healthy weeks he's played so far, he's averaged 30 total potential opportunities, which outside Derrick Henry, you're not really getting that from anybody else. The problem is he is currently 50-50 to play. If he plays, you can only assume he's good to go, because why put out a gimpy Christian McCaffrey risk injury? So it's something to monitor right now. If he plays, my projections like him a lot, like one of the better point per dollar running backs on the slate, just because he's too cheap. Like Christian McCaffrey should be a 10K player, and the fact that he's not under $9,000 just screams value. And a very good matchup versus Minnesota. Austin Eckler, $700. He went off last week. You got to keep in mind though, one of those plays is thrown into the end zone by the Browns defense because they needed them to score to get the ball back. So maybe if we take away those 6 points, I think that would be a better picture, but it was still a great game nonetheless, and you can't take that away from him. And he's been awesome this year. He's pretty much the new Alvin Kamara, because Kamara's not really using the passing game anymore these days. He's averaging nearly 13.5 rushing attempts per game, nearly a rushing touchdown, 5.2 yards per carry, and close to 5 targets per game, over half a receiving touchdown. Like he's been a touchdown scoring monster so far this year. I'm not sure the touchdowns will keep up at this pace, but he's definitely killing it so far. And this game should be quite high scoring, so if you just want to get a piece of that offense, definitely don't mind Austin Eckler, who seems a little bit cheap at $7,900. Then dropping down to the 6K range here, we are loaded with some very good running back plays. Jonathan Taylor, $6,600. I think he'll be one of the highest on running backs on the entire slate. Just a good setup here versus Houston. Colts are 10-point favorites at home, a near 27-point implied team total. And with Taylor's game that he had on Monday night versus the Ravens, that'll definitely boost his ownership up, just because when people have a good game recently, people look at the game logs and they plug that guy in the next slate. And it just so happens to be that Jonathan Taylor's in a great spot. He shares the workload with guys like Marlon Mack and Nyheim Hines, but he's still the main RB1 here. And at $6,600, he just seems too cheap for the potential that he offers us. Yes, he had over 100 receiving yards last week. Not sure that'll keep up, and it's really going to skew the averages right now, because he's now averaging nearly 40 receiving yards per game on 3.2 targets, which we really can't expect that to keep up. So I'd expect that number to keep going down as the season progresses. But he does offer you a little bit of receiving upside. It's not like he's a afterthought in the offense as far as that goes. But I love the game script, 10-point favorites. I think this sets up very well for Jonathan Taylor. Definitely one of the best cash game RBs in the slate. Joe Mixon at $6,400. I do have workload concerns here, and he didn't practice yesterday, which it was probably on purpose just to give him some extra rest. But Samaje Perine, it's looking like he is not going to play. It's not official yet, because you never know how it's going to work out with COVID testing and things like that. But if he's out, I mean, Joe Mixon is pretty much the guy there, unless they really want to get Chris Evans involved too much. And this is a great spot versus Detroit. They're 3.5-point favorites. They're on the road, but Detroit is so bad versus the run. They're 29th versus running backs, laying over 31 DraftKings points per game. They're 28th DVOA, laying over rushing touchdown per game, and over 100 rushing yards. So Joe Mixon, I think he's a fine turn-on play. I would not go there in cash games just because dealing with the injury, I don't want to risk that in cash games. In tournaments, yes, I do like Joe Mixon, but for $200 more, Jonathan Taylor seems a lot safer. DeAndre Swift, 6,300 bucks. I think he's cash or tournament viable here. If you're stacking the Bengals up, DeAndre Swift is actually like the best run back option for the Lions unless you want to use Amon-Ra St. Brown. But Swift's heavily involved in the passing game. He doesn't really get too much work on the ground, only 10 rushing attempts per game. But he's averaging nearly 7 targets per game, which equates to nearly a 20% target share. And plus the Bengals defense, I wouldn't say is anything too scary. Yes, they're 7th DVA versus run, but they're also 20th versus running backs. And they're allowing over 8 catches per game, which is pretty much DeAndre Swift's bread and butter. So this actually profiles pretty well for a guy like Swift, and I feel like he's a bit underpriced. So if you want to use him in cash games or tournaments this weekend, I have no problem with that whatsoever. Although I feel like he's a better suit for tournaments, but I think you could get away with it in cash games just because of that high floor with his receptions every single week. Then Henderson at $6,000. I would expect him to be the highest running back on the slate. Great setup here versus the Giants, very similar to what Jonathan Taylor has versus the Texans this week, as they're both massive favorites, 9.5-point favorites here. They're on the road, 29-point implied team total. Rams offense is excellent. Henderson did miss a week this year, but he's yet to have a bad game, scoring the double digits each and every single time. We know there's going to be plenty of scoring opportunities for him, as well as the Rams can move the ball, especially versus the New York Giants defense, averaging close to a rushing touchdown per game, nearly 5 yards per carry. He's slightly involved in the passing game, so he's got a bit of a floor there. And the Giants this year, 26 versus running backs, and they're also 26 DVA versus the pass, letting over 120 rushing yards per game and nearly 50 receiving yards. So Henderson, love the price. He currently grades out as my best point per dollar running back on the entire slate. Then moving on to the wide receiver position, I try to keep this as simple as possible for you guys because I don't want to break down each and every single wide receiver from the slate. That takes way too long. Just depends on what quarterbacks you're using or what stacks you're going for. There are some wide receivers you can use as standalones, especially in cash games, one being Davante Adams, who I've played several times so far in cash games this year. You don't have to play Aaron Rodgers when you roster Davante Adams just because he soaks up pretty much the entire passing volume in that offense. It's a weird offense. It works out, but it's basically just all Davante Adams and the wide receivers are basically dust. Chicago, bit of a tougher defense, so like 7 DVA versus pass, but I don't care. It's Adams, there's like 20th versus wide receivers. 38% target share, like a near 90% weight opportunity share, 45% market share of the team's air yards. It's absolutely crazy. Play Davante Adams if you can afford him. Tyreek Hill, if you are rostering Patrick Mahomes, just makes sense to pair him up with his top wide receiver. Although he has had 2 DMPs in a row, so if he happens to miss, Mecole Hardman at $4,200 down here definitely becomes interesting. He had 12 targets last week, plays the majority of the snaps, runs a lot of the routes, and I mean, $4,200. I mean, yeah, there's more defensive pressure on him because Tyreek Hill's not there to take the defense off of him, but still averaging 6 targets per game. He got the best quarterback in the league throwing him the ball, so definitely would have my eyes on Mecole Hardman. I think he's playable even if Tyreek Hill plays, but if he's out, obviously that's going to boost his ownership up by quite a bit. Cooper Kupp, Robert Woods, $7,100 for Kupp and $6,100 for Woods. If you're playing Matthew Stafford, you got to get at least one of these guys in their lineups because the ball is going their direction. Robert Woods had the blow game last week. Cooper Kupp the weeks before that, he was the guy blowing up. Cooper Kupp is still the main guy here, but Robert Woods is considerably cheaper. And if we're going to even out, like I've been saying is going to happen all season long, like I don't think Cooper Kupp's going to keep up with like a 40% target share and Robert Woods is going to be below 20%. I think we're going to see that kind of meshing together as the season progresses, and I think we saw a little bit of that last week. The coach did say they're going to get Robert Woods more involved, and hey, guess what? It actually happened. So it's nice to see coach speak coming to fruition. Terry McLaurin, $7,100. If you are playing Heineke, you can play him naked if you want, but I would really try to get a pass catching option with them. The preferred options are Terry McLaurin, Ricky Seals-Jones, and really those are the only options because everybody else is pretty bad. Yes, you have some guys out of the backfield like J.D. McKissick or Antonio Gibson, but as far as wide receivers go, Terry McLaurin is pretty much the only guy here, averaging nearly 10 targets per game, over a 30% target share, 44% market share of the team's air yards. And the Chiefs are 31st DVA versus the pass and bottom half of the league versus wide receivers. So McLaurin definitely on my radar, especially if they're playing catch-up. Jamar Chase, $6,700. The rookie has been amazing this year. The targets are really low for a guy that's this price compared to pretty much everybody else in less than 5 catches per game. He's kind of been surviving on big plays and touchdowns, but that's what good players do sometimes, and that's his role in the offense. And if you're playing Joe Burrow, getting some of his pass catches in, whether it be Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, who I really like at $5,300. I think that price point is excellent. I think you can play him in cash games, tournaments, or whatever it may be. And Tyler Boyd, I believe, is only $5,400. I do not have him on here, but I don't think that means he's a bad play. I just want to list every single wide receiver in the slate. But Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, definitely my preferred option in that Bengals offense. And Keenan Allen just seems too cheap, $6,400. I know it's not the greatest matchup versus Baltimore versus wide receivers this season. They've allowed the 9th fewest points per game, but they are 20th DVA versus the pass. We've seen wide receivers have decent games versus them, so I'm not like overly concerned. I know he hasn't shown the ceiling that Mike Williams has had this year, but he's been very consistent. Nearly 7 catches per game, over 10 targets, about 75 receiving yards. The touchdowns really aren't there, but still 26.5% target share and near 30% market share of the team's air yards. You can only assume defenses are going to really start scheming out Mike Williams at this point because he's just destroying defenses. So Keenan Allen, like that price point a lot, I think you can play him in cash games. Brandon Cooks, $5,800. Hate the quarterback throwing the football, but I mean, he is the main threat there, and the Colts secondary is not good whatsoever. I think we saw that last week where they were just getting absolutely eaten alive, whether it be Mark Andrews or Hollywood Brown. A couple of other guys had some decent catches, but Brandon Cooks, $5,500. I think he is viable. It's just a little bit gross because I just hate rostering Texans, but a 34% target share, nearly 50% market share of the team's air yards, 85% weighted opportunity share. And the Colts versus wide receivers this year, 25th versus the position, allowing 2 receiving touchdowns per game in their 30th DVA versus the pass. If you are rostering Jonathan Taylor, he actually does make sense as a good run back option. Jacoby Myers, $5,500. Yes, I know, Javon Diggs. They're still getting cooked versus wide receivers, allowing over 200 receiving yards per game, 29th versus the position, despite being 7th DVA versus the pass. So Jacoby Myers, a good matchup versus the Dallas secondary. Who gets peppered with targets, averaging 9 targets per game. He's yet to score a touchdown in his NFL career at some point. It's going to happen, but I don't mind Jacoby Myers here. It's just a safe volume option. J. Higgins, we already talked about. We already talked about Mecole Hardman. There's a couple other wide receivers that I think are interesting. Those are like the main guys I like as of right now. Moving on to the tight end position, I think it's pretty simple this week. You're either spending it for Travis Kelce, you're spending all the way down for Ricky Seals-Jones, or you're right in the middle with Mark Andrews. I think either way is fine. Travis Kelce is just dummy cheap this week. I don't understand why he's this low. Every single game this year, he's been above $8,000, and then after he has a decent game versus Buffalo, they priced him at $7,000 with a banged up Tyreek Hill. So I actually really like Ricky Seals-Jones and Travis Kelce a lot this week, and I actually think you could play them both together because they're not typical tight ends. Like, these guys are basically wide receivers out there. Like, if you just pretended Travis Kelce had a WR next to his name instead of tight end, it would feel a lot better just throwing him in the flex spot, and then you could play Ricky Seals-Jones at $3,000. I actually think this is a viable way to go. My optimizer is actually spitting out quite a few double tight end lineups this week. I'm not sure how to feel about it, but they actually don't look that bad. I mean, Travis Kelce is not your prototypical tight end, and neither is Ricky Seals-Jones. Like, these guys will line up out wide or in the slot, and they can do some damage. Like, so far this season, Travis Kelce, 43% of his snaps are in the slot. Ricky Seals-Jones at 56%, and Mark Andrews is at 53%. Travis Kelce is at wide 31% of the time as well. So just things to keep in mind there. But Travis Kelce, best tight end in football. Volume's always there. He gets wide receiver 1 numbers, but he's a tight end, and he's just way too cheap this week. And if Tyreek Hill happens to be out, well, it's going to be really hard not to play Travis Kelce. And even if he's in, I mean, doesn't matter. Love Travis Kelce at that price point. Just way too cheap. This is probably the cheapest we'll see him all season long. I feel like this is the cheapest we've seen him in like a couple years now. Mark Andrews went off last week. You cannot expect those kind of numbers each and every single week. Lamar Jackson has been amazing so far this year. He's got a 24% target share, 8 receiving yards per game, 8 out of 9.7, which is pretty good for a tight end. And the Chargers are dead last versus the position, allowing 20.5 DraftKings points per game. David Njoku had like a 75-yard touchdown versus them last week. Not something you could expect every single week for a tight end, but Mark Andrews is definitely one of the best in the league. And Ricky Seals-Jones, $3,000, pretty much playing all the snaps right now with no Logan Thomas. He was peppered with targets last week. And if you're playing Heineke, he's just a dirt cheap pairing option with him, so it makes sense correlation-wise. And the Chiefs have been pretty bad versus tight ends for a couple years now. So far this season, few game sample size, but they're ranked 28th, allowing nearly 100 receiving yards per game and 18.5 DraftKings points per game. So not a lot of tight ends to pick from, but I think it's a solid group. And then looking at defenses, I don't really care who you play defense. Just try to pick one that's not going to get absolutely destroyed. Like, the Rams are the ones you'd want versus the Giants in a game that should have some wind. I mean, they're heavy favorites here, 9.5-point favorites, low implied team total, but you don't want to spend nearly $5,000 for a defense. There's just no reason to do that. The Colts grade out the best for me. I mean, 16.75 implied team total against them, which is the lowest on the slate. They have 43.5-point over-under, 10-point favorites at home. They're not overly expensive at like $4,500, $3,500 is actually quite respectable. So if you want to play them, I think that's fine, although it's still a bit expensive for me for defenses. I typically try to go bottom of the barrel here, and some of the best options, I think the Browns at $2,600. Yes, I know they got absolutely torched last week. A lot of injuries in the defense. Hopefully it's a little bit healthier for this game. Have to wait for some injury reports there, but they're 3.5-point favorites. And there's expected wind in this game. Actually, some decently heavy sustained winds, like 15, 20 miles per hour, which is definitely a boost for the defenses. So Browns, 23-point implied team total against them. Not too crazy there. Playing at home, $2,600. I could see that actually being quite chalky this weekend. And everybody else, maybe you play the Ravens at $2,300 versus the Chargers, but I'm not really sure I want to go that route. I think I'd rather play the Browns. The Vikings below 3K, 2.5-point favorites. Chiefs, I like the football team offensive pieces, so I can't really see myself going with the Chiefs, but they're all viable down there. But the Browns at $2,600 do look like potentially the best way to go in cash games if you're just looking for a punt defense this week with some upside. But with that being said, I think that'll be pretty much it for the video. So I hope it was helpful, and if it was, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet already. If you want to take that one step further, become a official member over on Patreon. Link is down below in the description for that. All the sports, all the optimizers, ownership projections, cheat sheets, Discord community, data sheets, projections, all that fun stuff, link can be found down below. If you want to join the community, we got a couple hundred people over there. We're more than happy to have you. And don't forget, this video was sponsored by Prize Picks, just you versus the projections. And as of right now, if you're new signing up there, you can get a free money bonus up to $100 when you use code CPET and tell them I sent you. I think that'll be it. I will stop rambling, and I'll see you guys tomorrow for the next 2 videos.